Disability accommodation issues. Again, disability is more broadly defined under New York law than it is under the Americans with Disabilities Act. There's no requirement that a condition substantially limits a major life activity to qualify for protection under the state law. Again, New York City and New York State have different definitions of disability. Of the two, it's probably fair to say that New York City's definition is broader, but both of them generally encompass basically any impairment that an individual might have of a physical or mental nature. So that is a huge distinction if you are from a state that doesn't have protections broader than the Americans with Disabilities Act. The Americans with Disabilities Act was amended a while ago now to expand its coverage, but that expansion still does not go as far as New York State's coverage. The key point being, obviously, you can't discriminate based on disability in New York, and more people will be protected, but you also have to provide accommodations to individuals with disabilities, and that can include accommodating individuals who work remotely. The pre-existing question was whether remote work itself was a reasonable accommodation. Often employers were able to successfully argue, at least pre-COVID, that allowing somebody to work from home isn't reasonable or poses an undue hardship. And I think the ability to make that argument is reduced in the post-COVID world. So we don't know exactly what all the long-term ramifications are going to be. This goes back to that question I asked earlier about whether remote work is a right or a privilege, but it is likely that an employer who says we can't let you work remotely as an accommodation for your disability will be confronted with evidence of a large number of individuals who they did allow to work remotely independent of any disability during the COVID pandemic, and whether employers can sufficiently distinguish that situation remains to be seen. The other point, of course, is if you do have an employee working remotely, you still have the accommodation obligation. So you may need to help the employee set up even their home work location to be able to work with some disability that they may have. Again, it's a case-by-case basis to determine what is reasonable or an undue hardship. You know, whether a court or administrative agency would say that you have to build a ramp or elevator in an employee's home to enable them to work if they're in a wheelchair, for example, you know, is probably a different question from whether you need to provide an ergonomic keyboard for an employee to use at home because they suffer from carpal tunnel syndrome. But again, these are all case-by-case questions that you can't just brush off on the theory that, well, they're at home, so we're not responsible.